Now people should be joining us. Sandra, did I make you co-host yet? Hi, everyone. We're just giving a few minutes for everybody to join. I'm Karen Fowler from the International Biogeography Society, and in a few minutes, Kathy Willis, the president of the society, will be introducing our guest speaker, José María Fernández-Palacios, for his talk. And so we'll give it a minute. And while everybody's logging in, we will go over a couple of different ways to ask questions and answers. So. You're probably all old hats at this, but just in case anybody's new to this webinar format, it works like Zoom, except that you as our attendees won't be able to unmute yourself or show your cameras unless we give you that permission. There should be a box at the bottom of your screen. You may have to hover over it to see it. That should have a chat, a raised hand, and a Q&A. And if you have general comments, the best place to put them is in this chat box right here. You can ask questions there too, but sometimes they get lost in the shuffle because it scrolls down. You can raise your hand if you want to ask a question during the Q&A session. That will just stay up there, and we can call on you during the Q&A session so that you can ask your question live. And for this webinar, we're going to transfer you over to a panelist so that your screen can show, as well as so you can add, and then we'll unmute you as well. And then if you have a Q&A that you want to type in, use the Q&A box here. And you can type your question at any time during the talk, but we won't ask that question. Sandra will be helping with question period. We won't ask that question until the Q&A session starts, but feel free to write it in at any point. And with that, I'm going to make sure that we are recording. Sandra, can you tell?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
We are recording.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because it looks like we've settled out with attendees joining, and Kathy can introduce.
So good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you're joining from. I'm Kathy Willis. I'm a professor of biodiversity here at the University of Oxford, but I'm also the current president of the International Biogeography Society. And it gives me very great pleasure today to introduce you to Professor José María Fernández-Palacios, who's going to give the second lecture of the IBS Funk lecture series. So just to remind you, this is a lecture series named after one of our founding members, Vicky Funk, who very sadly died last year. So José María currently holds a chair in ecology and biogeography at the University of La Laguna on the truly wonderful island of Tenerife, which is part of the Canary Islands and Spain. José María has a very long and illustrious academic career. I would thoroughly recommend looking him up on Google and reading some of the papers. They are fantastic. I did that this afternoon. But his research focuses around island biogeography and ecology, as well as forest dynamics, particularly looking at the tertiary relic forests, the laurel forests that are found and very unique in the Canary Islands. And he's looked at both their variation, not only in space, but also in time and using fossil records. Besides his pure research, José María has also had a number of research projects focused on conservation of biodiversity on islands, and has been actively involved in the development of conservation and this topic and policy around this topic, locally, regionally, and also internationally. And this desire to conserve biodiversity is hardly surprising, given that José María lives and works in one of the most biodiverse islands in Europe, and one that many people probably don't know is in fact one of our only biodiversity hotspots in Europe, one of our the Conservation International categorized biodiversity hotspots. So without further ado, I'm very much looking forward to this. I hand over José María to talk about islands, outstanding conservation, biodiversity in peril.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi to everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the initiative of the International Biographical Society for counting with me here today, and especially to Kathy Willis, to Sandra Noé, and to Karen Fowler. And for me, it's also very special to participate in this Wikifun talk series, because I have had the pleasure of knowing her personally, both in Washington at the Smithsonian and here in Tenerife when we organized the 2007 IBS meeting. And I kept a very nice relation with her, and sadly, she passed away last year. Was really very hard news. Okay, my talk today, as you can see in your screen, is called Islands, Outstanding Biodiversity in Peril. And here you have some nice pictures of island animals that have vanished in our noses, like the dodo, the thylacine, the elephant bird of Madagascar, the stellar marine cow, the Canarian giant lizards, or the moas and the husked eagle, just to give some examples. I'm going to speak about 25-30 minutes, and then, as you know, you will have time enough for making questions. Okay, the very first question is, how many islands are there? Today, there is no agreement about an approximate number of islands worldwide. For instance, only in Indonesia, there are 17,500 islands, of which 6,000 are inhabited by humans. And as far as I remember, 8,000 have been given names. Important land bridge island clusters of more than 1,000 islands include, for instance, South China Sea, 30,000 islands, Stockholm Archipelago, 24,000 islands, Philippines, more than 7,000 islands, Japan, almost 7,000 islands, Åland Archipelago, 6,500, Aegean Archipelago, 6,000, Chinese Sichuan Islands, almost 5,000, Australian Great Barrier, more than 3,000, or Maldives and the Dalmatian islands of Croatia in the Adriatic Sea with more than 1,000 each. And to this very important number of land bridge islands, we have to sum up at least 2,000 volcanic islands and some 20 to 30 continental fragments. And this is not counting lacustrine and riverine islands. Only in Finland, there are 118,000 lacustrine islands. Okay, which is the number of islands existing? We don't know. My guess, my personal guess is there are maybe some 1 million islands. And if we add seamounts, not real islands, but biogeographical islands, we are going to add 1 million more at least. Okay, there is also an incredible huge variation in the geographical and historical attributes of islands. Just some examples. Islands vary in size from Greenland, our largest island, 2.1 million square kilometers, to rocks less than 10 square meters, meaning more than 10 orders of magnitude, which is actually the border between islands and Australia. It has been put between Australia, the smallest continent, 7 million square kilometers area, and Greenland, the largest island, 2.1 million square kilometers island. Although Greenland is in fact a set of many islands united by an ice cap. So many people used to leave Greenland aside and consider New Guinea as the largest island of the world. Islands vary also in age from circa 150 million years old from Madagascar to just a few decades like Sorse, or just a few years like Nishonishima in the Bonin Archipelago. Islands vary also in elevation from peaks exceeding 4,000 meters above the sea level, like in New Guinea, Carsten's Peak, in Borneo, Taiwan, Hawaii, to just flat atolls just centimeters above the sea level, as happens in Maldives or Kiribati. Also, they vary a lot in isolation, from more than 4,700 kilometers from Marquesas to South America, to just hundreds of meters, like happens with Anglesey, Sicily, Sakhalin. Also in latitude, from 84 degrees north, actually Udak, the world's northernmost emerged land, to 81 south, like Bergmerk Island. And also islands vary in historic attributes, like they vary in the colonization or settlement moment from New Guinea, circa 5,000 years before the present, to Tristan da Cunha, that was only settled just 200 years ago. And obviously islands vary as well in human population density, from circa 8,000 inhabitants per square kilometer, like happened in Singapore or in Hong Kong, to many uninhabited islands around the world. Okay, which are the island contribution to global data? As we are going to see in a moment, the percentage of area in which island contributes is not fixed, depending on the assumptions. But usually we are going to see this 4.8% of the Earth's land area is contributed by islands. But up to 10% of the human population is living on islands. 25% of the nations recognized in the world are island nations, and 27% of the languages spoken by humans are languages only spoken on islands. Here we have a map in black with the present emerged territory, and in red with the territory now sunken but that was emerged 20,000 years ago during the last glacial maxima. In the Holocene world, so today, there are some 150 million square kilometers emerged. From then, 140 in form of continent, and some 10 million square kilometers in form of islands, meaning that islands actually contribute to a 6% of the emerged territory. But usually we are not going to use or to see this info, because usually all the authors used to exclude Arctic and Antarctic islands because they contribute very, very little to the global biodiversity. When doing that, we have to subtract Greenland, but also the Canadian Arctic archipelago, Svalbard, and the Siberian islands, meaning that we are going to subtract some 4 million square kilometers from these 10 million square kilometers by islands, meaning that islands only contribute with this 4.8%. And this is where this famous figure stems from. But have a look. If we just go in time 20,000 years ago, we are going to see that very important islands today, number 1, New Guinea, number 3, Borneo, number 7, Sumatra, or Java, they were all peninsulas of their respective continent, either Asia with the huge Sunda Peninsula or with the Sahul continent comprising present-day New Guinea, Australia, and Tasmania. So subtracting these very large islands together with the British Isles or Japan, the contribution of islands drops to a 2.1%. And just remember that Holocene and interglacial is the exception. Actually, the rule is a glaciation, at least in the last 2.7 million years, and the mean sea level in this Pleistocene epoch has been something about -80 in respect to present day sea level. Okay, and here you have a map of all the island states existing. 48 out of 193 United Nations states are island nations. And here you see in green those island states with terrestrial borders, like Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Santo Domingo, or Haiti, and in blue, those without. And here in these maps, we are not including some 50 dependencies or territories that are not properly states, and a lot of regions like, or states like Hawaii, Galapagos, Canaries, or all the whole Macaronesian, European Macaronesian that is not even included. Okay, good news. Outstanding biodiversity on islands. Some 20% of the Earth's biodiversity, this figure is also not fixed, usually varies between 17 and 25%, are distributed only on islands. Why so? While this huge percentage, only if islands only contribute with a 5%, their biodiversity contributes 4 times its area. Why so? Islands have simultaneously evolutionary labs and relic museums. Evolutionary labs, meaning that species impoverishment due to an important and persistent isolation creates ecological opportunities that are filled through adaptive radiation. Easy erodibility of volcanic rocks implies important erosion, creating topographic complexity that enhance isolation opportunities and geographic speciation. Adaptive radiation plus geographic speciation means high biodiversity in neoendemics, and they are also museums because the mild affection of age glaciations due to the ocean buffer effects plus vertical migration opportunities to withstand climatic impacts create refugia for paleoendemics that vanish in the continent, meaning that paleoendemics plus neoendemics equals high biodiversity. And there are still several taxa that have not been seriously researched on islands. A lot of microorganisms, for instance, dictate amoeba, for instance, organisms relate to the roots of the plants, organisms living on the canopy of the forest. This is still everything to be discovered. So I guess that many new species will come to the island inventory. Just as an example, in Tenerife, for the last 20 years, in the Canaries, we have been discovering a new, for science, species every 5 days, including vertebrates, trees, and a lot of vascular plants and arthropoda. Okay, the contribution of islands to the global biodiversity is mainly based in 3 island types: continental fragments or microcontinents, such as Madagascar, New Zealand, New Caledonia, large Antilles, or the Mediterranean islands, that contribute outstandingly due to their important size and persistence isolation. Then we do have the volcanic meta-archipelagos or archipelagos like Polynesia, Macaronesia, Philippines, Galapagos, Mascarenes, Les Antilles, that despite being small in area, contribute to due to their elevation, hosting very different habitats, and also to their important isolation. And finally, we do have tropical, very large land bridge islands like New Guinea, Borneo, Sumatra, or Java, that contribute with endemicity due to their tropical latitude, but not so much due to their insularity. Those I have here, I think 9 regions. These 9 regions may contribute for the big majority of the island biodiversity. Okay, an example, for instance, European Union overseas entities, all being islands except French Guiana, harbor the 80% of the European Union biodiversity. And here you see all those entities. This map is pre-Brexit, but I think that the example is good enough to keep it. So there are a lot of entities, territories, or even regions of the European Union that are extra-continental, are offshore, and the 80% of the European Union biodiversity is not in the continent, but in the islands or territories overseas belonging to the European countries. Here I have a list with some outstanding examples of island radiations worldwide. And here you can see there are 2 columns for animal taxa and for plant taxa. And in bold, I have only marked those with more than 100 species, usually, although not always, usually as monophyletic events, like the Anolis lizards in the Caribbean, the Drosophila flies in Hawaii, Trigonodini crickets in Hawaii, lemurs in Madagascar, microhylid frogs in New Guinea, or the lobeliads in Hawaii, the Dombeya or the Dipsis palms in Madagascar, or Philanthus in New Caledonia. So this is one of the reasons these explosive radiations happen on islands contribute disproportionately to the global biodiversity. Actually, if we use the negative of islands like big lakes in the middle of continents like the African Reef Lakes, we are going to see exactly the same pattern. And there, for instance, the Malawi Lake hosts 1,000 species of cichlid river fishes that stem from a single ancestor. And with Victoria Sea or with Tanganyika Sea is more or less the same. Okay, but usually when you have good news, somewhere should be also bad news. And this is also a reality with islands. Bad news, outstanding conservation problems. Actually, islands contribute with the 50% of the endangered species of the IUCN list, with a 75% of the record extinctions, and with an 85% of the extinctions linked to invasives. Insular species are 4 times more likely to become endangered and 16 times more likely to become extinct than continental ones. Why so? There are 3 main drivers. A, intrinsic island characteristics. B, demographic/genetic per se fragility of island populations. And C, island syndromes that make island species vulnerable to human impact. And now we're going to see each of them. Fragility of island biotas. That has to do with the intrinsic island characteristics. For instance, volcanism, that has as a consequence the partial or global island sterilization. Here you see the formation of a new volcano or the destruction of an old island by a new volcano. And here you see in Gran Canaria an example of a postulate sterilization event some 4 million years ago. Then we do have landslides, what means partially island collapse. And here you see how the Canaries, like all volcanic islands of the world, they are affected by those huge landslides where you can lose 1/2 or 1/3 of your island just in seconds. The youngest one here in the Canaries happened in El Golfo some 13 to 17,000 years ago. We do also have tsunamis because all those landslides will create tsunamis. And here we have a map of the famous tsunami that won't happen if La Palma collapses. And here you see how the tsunamis affect the whole archipelago, but also European, African, or even the North and South American coast. We have also sea level shifts. I mean, island fusion and island fission, what has happened retroactively at least 25 to 30 times in the ice age. And here you see the examples of how 2 islands will join together when the sea regression is important enough, and how they will again be separated when the water comes again to this initial level. And we do have also subsidence or island submergence, like here we have a hotspot archipelago, how the island once off the chimney connecting the magma with the island begin to subside. And in this case, because of the sea temperature is high enough, they will form the Phrygian reef and an atoll will happen. But the island is here vanishing simply because subsidence. Or finally, hurricanes, like this picture I take from the CNN channel. So it was last month, you can see 5 different hurricanes formed in the Atlantic Ocean, what is actually something really, really rare. A second step is the intrinsic fragility, either geographic, demographic, or genetic, of island populations. For instance, the small distribution range, because endemics are usually single island endemics, mean that they are going to have higher extinction risk due to stochastic events like volcanism, landslides, and also lower population size unless the species undergo density compensation. We are going to have species with naturally fragment distribution range, meaning that in the islands, the population, the genetic diversity is population structured, meaning that extirpations of populations imply always genetic heritage loss, so that the populations and not the species are the operational conservation units. And actually this means that conservation on islands needs much more resources. Also, lower population size implying lower effective population size and risk of stochastic or demographic collapse. There are few populations and few individuals per populations, meaning that it's genetic drift who controls the evolution, and that imply a non-adaptive path, thus meaning species not fitting in the environment, and obviously inbreeding, depression, and collapse. And finally, the population origin through the founder event means that population bottleneck resulting in low and singular genetic diversity. And finally, we have the third element that makes island biotas so vulnerable. In this case, has to do with the syndromes that island species tend to develop because they are better for their living on the islands, but in the absence of human beings. And here we have some nice examples of such syndromes, like the PalaeoEcology, the smallest elephant we have known, with less than 1 meter height, or the moas in New Zealand, or the sunflower trees of St. Helena, or the dodo. For instance, gigantism has as consequence after human colonization a bigger reward for hunting source of meat. Dwarfism, a decrease of fierceness, facilitating hunting and or predation by introduced predators. Flightlessness, facility for hunting and or predation by introduced predators. Insular woodiness, lodging target for firewood, weapons, etc. Loss of dispersibility, no escape from induced disturbance. Dioecia, mating difficulty in precarious demographic conditions. Tameness, naivety against hunting predation. Loss of defenses against herbivory. Facility for predation by introduced herbivores. Reduction in clutch size. Less recovery potential during disturbance. And finally, although it's not a syndrome, it's a circumstance, lack of contact with diseases, pathogens, vulnerability against import diseases, as you see here, is this mosquito biting the apapane and very likely transmitting the malaria, the avian malaria to it, a disease that was not known in Hawaii until the human involuntary introduction of mosquito larvae in the ship waters. And here you see the guy, the Maori, hidden after a trunk, trying to hunt the moa, what they actually hunt to extinction in less than 100 years after their arrival. And here you see the very sad example of the introduction of the Boiga irregularis, the tree brown snake in Guam and other Marianan Islands, that has bring to the extinction of some 10 endemic species of birds and also some 5 endemic species of bats. And here I have just a gallery of some frequent companions of human to islands, and you can imagine goats, rabbits, ecosystem transformers, pigs, the same, and rats or cats are predators able to extinguish and extirpate a lot of populations that are already, even without the human colonization, in peril because the intrinsic conditions of the islands. Okay, bad news. Cumulative insular species extinctions curve per taxa since the European expansion, taken from Whittaker et al. Work. And here you can see that the situation is not very promising. This was more or less the European expansions. And here you see how for different taxa, and especially for all the taxa together, how the curve is increasing and increasing and increasing. And very likely it's going to be very hard to bend in, very complicated to bend in. Okay, fact, islands show the highest proportion of threatened and extinct birds and mammals. And here you see a list of the 15 territories with highest proportion of threatened or extinct species, both for mammals and for birds. And in blue are island or archipelagos, and in green, mainland countries. And as you can see, there's only one green bar. It's Bhutan, the small state north to India. The rest of the territories, both in mammals and in birds, all of them are insular territories. Here, also according to IUCN, here we see the insular in green versus continental in blue post-description species extinction. With post-description, we mean that those species were known alive by the very first scientists that joined in the very big trips around the world, like Captain Cook or like the French La Perouse and so on. But later they have been extinguished. And here you see that again, the islands contribute with a disproportionate share, 94% for birds, 90% for reptiles, 71% for arthropods, 69% for mollusks, 68% for vascular plants, 60% for frogs, or 54% for mammals. This is a paradigmatic case. Lord Howe Island, only 10 square kilometers belonging to Australia in the Pacific Ocean, account for more endemic bird extinctions, 11, than Asia and Africa together, obviously because of the humans. And here, this is the map of the late Quaternary, so last 40,000 years before the present, anthropogenic pre-description species extinctions of endemic vertebrate genera by territories. And what do we mean with pre-description species extinctions? Those are species that we have never known alive, but we recognize them through fossil material, like bones, like leaves, like pollen, like feather, and so on. And again, the islands contribute with almost a 60%, even if their territory is only a 5% of the today emerged territory. And here, this is my last map. Archipelagos contributing to endemic vertebrate genera extinction due to human activities worldwide. And here I have divided the archipelagos in those in orange that were already colonized by Aborigines when the Europeans arrived there, or those in blue that were not populated and were thus colonized by Europeans. And the number points to the number of endemic genera, endemic vertebrate genera that were extinct. And here you see there is more or less a pattern, meaning that those archipelagos that were already populated by Aborigines, like the Caribbean, like Polynesia, like Melanesia, New Guinea, like New Zealand, or like Madagascar, the number of genera miss or forever is important, although there are also some exceptions, like the Canaries were already populated by Aborigines 2,000 years ago, and there were not that many extinctions, or in the Mediterranean area, but those that were later colonized by Europeans, like Azores, Madeira, Cabo Verde, Galapagos, the South Atlantic Islands, or here Mascarenhas and Seychelles, this is also an exception because the number is a little bit higher, used to have less extinctions. Okay. Oh, there was a map more, sorry for that. This is the map of the Conservation International 2005 biodiversity hotspots. And here I would like to stress that from these 34, 9 are exclusively insular, Caribbean islands, Madagascar and satellites, including Comoros, Mascarenhas and Seychelles, East Melanesia, Japan, New Caledonia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Polynesia, Micronesia, and Wallachia. And 3 more have a substantial portion of their diversity within islands. For instance, the Mediterranean basin, including Macaronesia, the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, or Sundaland. Okay, island extinctions, some general rules. Island species have been always vulnerable, with or without humans living there. A trip in the time machine to an island before its human colonization would also produce a red book of endangered species. There are 3 main drivers of island extinction: species loss due to intrinsic island features, spontaneous extinction driven by geological climatic events, and those are independent of human activity. Then species loss due to intrinsic island population structure, like spontaneous extinction driven by genetic demographic processes which are independent of human activity, although humans, when decimating those populations, accelerate their extinction rate. And finally, species loss due to evolutionary processes emerging on island species, what we call island syndromes, that make them more fit but vulnerable to human impacts. No spontaneous extinction. This is an extinction mainly driven by human activities. And the drivers of the cultural extinctions on islands are the first colonizers, irrespective of their technological development, either Aborigines or Europeans. If the islands had been inhabited by Aborigines, Hawaii, Marquesas, Rapa Nui, Canaries, Antilles, Madagascar, the European impact on extinction was less important because the majority of the species prone to go extinct have already been extinguished. If the islands were not previously inhabited, Mauritius, La Reunion, Santilina, Juan Fernandez, Azores, Cape Verde, Madeira, Europeans drove the extinction wave. Result, shift from the late Pleistocene continental megafauna extinction towards an Holocene insular megafauna and flora extinction, whose onset coincides with the human colonization of oceanic islands and is still ongoing. And my two last slides are a contribution to a decalogue of actions to bend the extinction curve on islands. One, to fund scientific surveys for completing the biotic inventory of the less known islands, or also of the less known taxa, like Guinea, Gulf Islands, Red Sea, Andaman, Nicobar, Micronesia, Desventurada, etc. To achieve a minimum threshold of 25% of protected territory in all the islands worldwide. To prepare red for threatened species and black for invasive aliens lists on all islands territory worldwide. To implement security barriers on islands for avoiding the introduction of new exotic species. To develop alien species control or eradication programs, such as New Zealand Predator-Free 2050 target. To promote habitat restoration, either for halting the extinction depth on islands or for capturing CO2 in form of biomass. To create altitudinal corridors that facilitate the redistribution towards the summit of native insular species due to climate change. To develop captive breeding programs and germ plus banks for all critically endangered species, to prepare islets free of alien predators, where to translocate the threatened endemic species, and finally, to reintroduce extirpate species there where the disease causes have ceased, or to perform controlled rewilding experiments for recovering the lost functions with taxon substitutes there where keystone species have been extinguished. And thanks for your attention. My very last slide is an homage for all the vertebrates that have gone extinct in Macaronesia due to human action. Okay.
Thank you, José María. That was a great talk. Thank you so much. So time for questions and answers. And thank you so much for all attendees that have already typed some questions here. So before we start, we thought a little bit how to organize all these questions and answer session. We have more or less 15 minutes, 20 minutes for all these questions. And there are different options. If you would like to ask yourself a question, please raise a hand and we will make you a panelist, so then you will be able to actually make the question yourself. If you prefer typing the questions, just type it in the question and answer box on the bottom of your Zoom. And if any of you that have already typed the question would like to ask yourself a question, just raise your hand and we will let you say the question yourself. So let's start. We have 4 questions already, José María, for you.
Okay.
Okay. I see that there's not raised hands yet, I think. So let's start then.
Oh, actually, Sandra, sorry. So I made Darko, who had his hand raised, I made him a panelist so he can see him and ask his questions. So if you're in that case and I've made you a panelist, just a warning that there is a brief kind of 5-second delay while we transfer you over and you can be seen. And after your question, well, before your question, Sandra will call on you. After your question, I'll probably change you back to an attendee. Does that sound good?
Very good. So let's start with Darko then. Darko, please.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Professor José María, thank you very much for your talk. Really, really nice to see this big overview.
Thank you.
So my question is, a known pattern across volcanic island is the peak on diversity on middle-aged islands. That has been reported for many localities and taxa. Do you think that one mechanism to explain that pattern could be some sort of evolutionary version of intermediate disturbance hypothesis? Because that hypothesis has been invoked to ecological timescales, really short timescales. Could we translate that into 1 or 2 million years to explain why these islands of Middle Age reached the peak?
Okay, Darko, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. To be sincere, I am not sure about that, but my guess is that the highest biodiversity attained by the intermediate age islands has to do with the erosion and with the topographic complexity that erosion creates in volcanic islands, meaning cliffs, ravines, that makes very easily the isolation of populations and then their geographic speciation. And if the isolated populations are demographically weak, the process driving this evolutionary, say, path is not going to be natural selection, but genetic drift, meaning that they will never be in harmony with the environment, and they are going to be always demographically weak and always playing with the inbreeding depression. And this is a way to create a lot of species that are going to be really not important from an ecological point of view, although they are obviously present and very important from a biodiversity point of view.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Darko. So let's start with one of the written questions. So when you were talking at the beginning, Bernd Lenzner, sorry if I pronounce the names incorrectly, put a question for you, José María.
Yeah.
Are there projections and estimates of how island area will change in the future under sea level rise projections?
Well, it may be projections, not to my knowledge. Well, I just know a little preliminary information. For instance, there is a model that said all the atolls will be submerged for the beginning of the next century. Okay, because the velocity of the corals is not so fast as the sea level. Yeah, if we are going to lose all the atolls, this is a very bad news, but especially from the social point of view of the people living there, not so much of the biodiversity point of view, because the flora and the fauna living in the atolls is also present in all the high islands. So we are not going to lose too much biodiversity, although some, but not too much. But we are going to lose countries. For instance, Kiribati or Maldives are going to vanish from the atlas. And they have to try to find a solution. I read recently that Kiribati was trying to negotiate with Fiji the acquisition of some inhabit islands to move their population to Fiji.
Thank you. Thank you, José María. We have Sarah here with us that she would like to ask a question as well.
Hi, thank you for the talk. This is really enjoyable for me. So I am not in the academic world when I had to fill out the little thing. I am actually the biodiversity conservation specialist for the Global Environment Facility, who works with small island countries. And I'm a biologist by training, but I'm far from that world now. And so I just wanted to ask, this is kind of a question that sits in the back of my head. I'm always advocating for conservation resources to be going to the islands. But how much of our understanding of extinction patterns and the level of extinction on islands is more based on the fact that it's easier to confirm an extinction on an island than it is when you're talking about species with larger ranges, maybe more remote or harder to survey. I've worked for the Red List in the past, so I think about these things very much in terms of what is really, what's a reflection of the data that we have and what is really true in terms of what's going on. And then I would also kind of ask how much of that, I appreciated when you talked about genera that are missing, because sometimes I wonder if when we talk about species, we're not actually talking about that much actual diversity. So we know species is kind of its own artificial category. So so I was just, I wanted to kind of those always sit in the back of my mind when I'm spouting these statistics and making the case for protecting island biodiversity. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, you are right. Things are more easy to research on islands, and also extinction is much more easy to know, to analyze on islands. But even so, the difference in the contribution of islands is so outstanding in comparison with the continents, even if it is more easy to work there, that I do believe firmly that islands contribute disproportionately, not just to biodiversity, but especially to biodiversity extinction. And even if islands have less species than continents, due to something we call species impoverishment, the very high percentage of endemicity existing in all the islands, for instance, continental fragments like New Caledonia, New Zealand, or Madagascar, they are all above 90% in almost all the taxa you can imagine, or in the volcanic islands like the Canaries, Hawaii, Galapagos, close to a 50%. So there are a lot of species that, due to the intrinsic island characteristic, even without humans, they are going to have problems. And now the humans came with all their, say, companion species, all their activities, and we multiply this extinction rate, maybe 4 or 5 orders of magnitude. And even if it is more easy to detect extinctions on islands, I firmly believe that there is much more extinction happening on islands than on continents.
Brilliant. So next question. We have another question in question and answer box from Rob Whittaker. And it's a nice talk. What are the most important biosecurity measures we should promote hard to policymakers to reduce further extinctions from non-native species?
Yeah. Thanks, Rob, for these words. I will just explain you my experience. Where I live in the Canaries, we hardly have any measure in that sense. And in the last years, a lot of species have been imported without barriers, and now some of them are pests, okay? I visited my students Lea de Nascimento some years ago in New Zealand, and when I went there to New Zealand with my suitcase, they don't ask me about alcohol, about tobacco, about drugs, just they ask me, please, we need to see your field work boots. Sorry? Yeah. So I have to pick from my luggage my boots and show them the boots. And they pass the boots through a scan just to see if there were seeds or whatever in my boots. So this was for me astonishing. So I think that New Zealand is somehow the light we should follow. And I think that it is very important in all the islands like this archipelago where I live that have done nothing for avoiding the introduction of exotics, that we are really playing with fire, and we may easily follow the very big problems that have happened in other archipelagos where this has been common, like Mauritius with a lot of extinct species, or the Caribbean, and so on.
Excellent. So we have Richard Phil that would like to ask a question.
Hi, José María. Thank you very much. Great talk. So I just wanted to pick up on your question, your answer to Donnie's, sorry, to spot the person who likes Donnie Darko, to Darko's question earlier about, so you were talking about the role of topographic heterogeneity in promoting species diversity on islands. And I'm wondering, from all your experience of islands, how much do you think it's about the topographic heterogeneity per se, or is it about kind of environmental isolation, either by topography or by sort of unusual rock types, chemical compositions, lack of certain nutrients, that sort of thing. So what's your feeling in terms of both the museum and the kind of speciation pump side of the endemicity on islands as to kind of what the relative roles of those processes might be?
Well, Richard, a very nice question. Let me see. My feeling in volcanic archipelagos that I have visited is that there where erosion has been working for several million of years, the landscape complicates really a lot. And with complication, I mean there is a lot of heterogeneity and a lot of places where species can actually become isolated, like Kauai in the Hawaiian archipelago, or like Santo Antão in Cabo Verde, or like the Reunion Islands in the part of Piton de Neige, or here in La Gomera, for instance. When I make a comparison with La Gomera and La Palma, two of the Canarian Western Islands, La Palma is larger and higher than La Gomera. But even so, La Gomera has more endemic species, simply because La Palma is much more smooth in the landscape because it's younger, but La Gomera is really complicated, full of ravines, and almost each ravine has its own set of a specific taxon. So, meaning that there is a sort of multiplying endemicity because of each ravine acts as a known island. Mm-hmm. And this is the situation repeats in other very dissect islands worldwide. So actually, I do believe that this heterogeneity coming from simply the aging, the erosion, wind, rain or sea erosion creates the conditions for a lot of speciation. And following the answer I gave already, my guess is that the big majority of this speciation is non-adaptive. Okay, nice to meet you, Richard.
Excellent, thank you. Let's keep going with questions. We still have a little bit of time. Next one is from Galapagos. So hi from the Galapagos Islands. My question is, what are or have been historically the main threats to island biodiversity in the Canaries? Thank you.
In the Canaries?
Yes.
So the question is not about Galapagos. It's coming from Galapagos asking for the Canaries. Yeah, well, this is a very good question. Let's see. The Canaries have already been populated by Aborigines, what we call the Guanche people, for 2,000 years at least, and very likely for more. That's our guess, okay? And even so, and I am not sure why, the ecosystems are generally in a good shape. Mm-hmm. And the species extinction that we have experienced are not that important as happens in other archipelagos of the world. Which is the reason for that? It's hard to say. But there may be several reasons. On the one hand, that the Aborigines' density was very low. This is something we do know. Mm-hmm. Nothing comparing with Hawaii, for instance. Nowadays, all the single Hawaiian island with a higher density than the present Hawaii is Oahu. The rest of the Hawaiian islands, the Big Island, Maui or Kauai, have had during the Polynesians before Cook's era a higher population density than today. So the same with Marquesas, but it is not the same in the Canaries. The Canaries, the Aborigines were really not very much people. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, the Canaries are very close to Africa. So there is a constant arrival, a spontaneous arrival of species that have tried to find their way. For instance, exploiting places there were a sort of disturbance was going, either volcanic disturbance, climatic disturbance, whatever. So we in the Canaries, we do have a set of what I called endemic species that behave as exotics. And when there is a perturbance, our endemics fill the gap and exotics have no opportunity because our endemics behaving as exotics fill already this gap, okay? So incredible, the Canaries that should have a much, I would say, worse nature or not so good shape nature, incredible, they keep a nice nature. At least this is my feeling. Maybe this has to do with that I am Canario, I hope not. But so which are the main stresses? Obviously, the arrival of humans, obviously, first Aborigines, but especially the arrivals of a new development model with the Castilians when they colonized the Canaries, and in the very last decades, tourism. The tourism is changing everything here in the Canaries and elsewhere.
Okay, so we still have time. Yes. Okay. One question is that I think that links quite nicely with the answer that you provided now. So here we go. Are there any examples of island nations that have started system migration programs for endangered species?
Yeah. The very best examples are New Zealand, Mauritius, and Hawaii, I would say. Well, Hawaii is not an island nation, but an island state. I think that these three are the lights in the dark night that people doing conservation in islands should look for, because New Zealand and Mauritius, they are doing a lot of nice things to try to avoid more extinctions and to recover the original landscapes and the original ecosystems. But the sad story is that they have reached this point simply because their nature has been destroyed, absolutely. Okay, so places like Macaronesia, where there are still some nature to see, maybe we don't have this level of conscience because we don't see the problems how they have seen them and they are seen now. Okay, so I would say Mauritius and New Zealand are very good examples of things that we should do.
Fantastic. Karen, we're going well with time, isn't it? 5. Okay, here we go. Maybe it will be the last one. So this is, say, hi, José María, very nice talk. I like your list of 10 things to do to halt biodiversity loss on islands. One thing that might be missing is, in my opinion, to create an awareness among the local inhabitants about the biological uniqueness the individual islands harbor. So to remind the locals what is species about, what is special about their island, would you like to comment on this?
Who is making this?
This is Severin, and sorry, the previous one was Brittany.
Okay, Severin, nice to see you. Okay, Severin, you're absolutely right. Yeah, this is true. This was just a tentative list, and obviously some very important things are missing. And this, the ones that you said, the educational approach to the island people to make them know how important is the biodiversity they are living with is fundamental. And I agree absolutely. And we have to begin with such programs as soon as possible, because it is the conscience of the local people, unfortunately, nothing else. It is the conscience of the local people and of the local governments who is going to begin to bend the curve. You're absolutely right.
I think we ought to come to a close now. I know we've still got 14 questions left in the question and answers box. It just shows actually, José María, how fantastic your talk was and how it really inspired people to think about islands across the world. We had 230 people joining in, actually from, I think, most of the islands across the world. So you were speaking to a truly global audience. And I want to say a huge thank you on behalf of everybody that joined in, and also on behalf of the International Biogeography Society for giving the second of these Vicky Funk lectures. I think she would have been absolutely thrilled to hear you talk. And it's a very strong legacy to Vicky that people like yourself are able to contribute to this lecture series. So we now need to draw to close. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a lecture series that we're running, particularly during the pandemic, but also really to pull together biogeographers from across the world on a monthly basis. I think we've all learnt over the COVID pandemic actually how important and how useful these series can be for pulling together the global community. So our next speaker, we're trying to do this once a month, but we won't do this in December. The next one will be in January. At the end of January, we will all be going to Norway, to Tromsø, to Inga Grivalos, who's going to be giving us a talk about how ancient DNA increases our understanding of species distribution and diversity through time and space. So please do join us for this next lecture. It looks like a very, very interesting talk, and I certainly will look forward to hearing Inga talking to us. And then finally, our final point is these are hosted by the International Biogeography Society. We're always looking to welcome new members to our society, and we have much going on our website. So please do join in and do think about becoming a member, both for now and for future, for building this incredible organization. So thank you for coming, and thank you once again, José María. Goodbye.
Okay, bye.